If you've heard about the benefits of using calendula flowers for tea, tinctures, ointments, and salves, I'm going to be talking about this beautiful flower and all its benefits and how to use it in this video. Hi, my name is Landon Gilthelen here with Pepper and Pine Garden Design, and today I brought you out to the garden to show you my calendula plant and all the ways that I'm using it this year for my herbal medicine cabinet. Calendula is an herb flower that I've been growing for a long time, but this year I'm making a very concerted effort to harvest these flowers at their peak point to use for different herbal medicines in my house this year. I love this flower. It's hard for me to cut it because I just love enjoying the blooms in the garden, and I do leave some of the blooms here to enjoy. But the thing about calendula is the more you cut it, the more it'll grow. What you're looking at right now, which is probably about 2.5, 3 feet tall and about that wide, is one calendula plant that I planted back in April. And it probably has 100 blooms on it right now. Some are open, some are closed, some are somewhere in between. And that is just one of the wonderful things about calendula, is that it is a cut and come again. It'll last all season, and the color it brings to your garden, to me, is just magnificent. So if nothing else, grow calendula to bring in the pollinators, to have these beautiful blossoms in your garden. And it's also a great companion plant for things like tomatoes. Now, for me this year, I really want to maximize this flower to use in various things in my house, like tea, tinctures, and external applications. So let's talk about the benefits of calendula. First of all, one of the things about calendula is you're just going to be using the flower. There are some herbs and flowers like mullein and yarrow where you use the flowers and the leaves. But for calendula, the medicinal benefits are in the flower petals and the little green part that is underneath the petals. So if you harvest the entire head of the calendula flower, this entire thing can be used for medicinal benefits for tea and otherwise. Now, if you want to use just the petals for like soaps, for the kind of aesthetic quality that you get by having those little petals sprinkled throughout the flower, you definitely want to remove the petals from that green bottom whenever you're drying them, because this will not be as pleasing to the eye or to the touch to use in those more topical applications. However, this part here and the flowers have high concentrations of the really potent essential oils that you're wanting for the medicinal benefits. So for medicinal purposes, you really want to keep this green part, whether you keep it intact or you split it or however you decide to use it. This whole flower head is good, is beneficial for this medicinal purposes. So we want to use the flower, but when do you harvest it? Well, the best time to harvest calendula and most herbs are in the morning after the dew has evaporated. So I'm usually out in my garden around 6:30 a.m. when the sun is just rising. So there is still generally some dew on these flowers. So I like to come back out in the garden around 10 or 11 when all that dew has evaporated. The flowers are opening and it's not too hot yet. And that is when I harvest these, because that is when they're at their maximum potential for the essential oils that are in these flowers. So right after the dew has evaporated in the morning, and that's going to change depending on where you're located in the world. For me, it's usually around 10 a.m. is when I come out to harvest these flowers. Now, how do you harvest these cute little flowers? Also known as pot marigold, right? If you've heard that term, pot marigold, that is another name for calendula. So I'm going to put this little guy in my jar that I've already harvested a bunch of little calendula flowers. There's different ways you can harvest it. You can really just pull up. I like to do this with my chamomile too, is I like to hold the stem with one hand and then pull up on the flower like this with my other hand, and it just pops right off. You can also use scissors and just snip it right under the base of your flower. Now, you can also come in and cut the stem out down to where you don't see any more flowers on that stem. However, I find it easiest to pull the flower off first and then cut the stem. Now, you could leave this on the plant, but I like a nice pretty plant. I don't like all the little stems that'll end up drying and falling off. So I like to trim these while I'm out here. And this is basically called deadheading. If you've heard of the term deadheading, there's a lot of flowers that benefit from the deadheading process in order to bring you more blooms throughout the season. And calendula is one of those plants. So I basically find the stem that I've just pulled the flower off of, and I go down to the crux or the branch where I see another stem coming off, and that's where I cut it. Making sure that I'm not cutting off a flower that might be somewhere on that branch. But generally it's pretty easy to tell with calendula where to cut those stems off at. So that's how you harvest it. That's when you harvest it. Now, what do you do with it once you've harvested it? Like any other herb, there's different ways that you can use calendula. You can use it as a tea, you can use it as a tincture, and you can use it externally or internally as an oil and externally as a salve. So what are the differences between those terms? Well, tea is pretty obvious, right? Hot water, flower equals tea. But you can use fresh flowers or petals straight out of the garden in hot boiling water. The sooner you use them after you've cut them, again, the more maximum benefit you'll get from those essential oils. Or you can dry them on a little drying rack, or however you choose to dry your flowers. You could cut the stems, hang them upside down and dry them like that, like I do some of my other herbs, and then snip off the flowers once they're dry. That is another way to do it. But you would want to keep the whole entire stem so you can wrap a rubber band or whatever around the stems and hang it. I personally like to lay out all my flowers on parchment paper or wax paper or one of my little cookie drying metal drying racks that allows the airflow to get around the entire blossom. And it takes quite a while for the entire blossom to dry. It's obviously going to be a lot quicker to dry the individual petals. So it's kind of up to you and how quickly you're wanting to use the dried flower or petals for your purposes. So I generally do both. I like to have some where I've pulled the petals off and some where I have the whole flowers, and that way I can use the petals quicker. I can use them in soaps or in a more, like I said, aesthetic quality. And then I have another place where I'm drying the actual flower heads. Now, once those flower heads are dried, you can also use those in tea. And the nice thing is, obviously, you'll have them throughout the year. So while I have fresh calendula in my garden, I like to take those inside here and there and use them as tea while they're fresh. But I am trying to collect as many as possible to dry in order to use for tinctures and salves and oils. So let's talk about that. So calendula oil is super easy to make. All you really need to do is dry your flowers or petals thoroughly. You want to make sure that they are completely dry before you put them in your carrier oil, because any moisture left in the flower and petals can cause their bacteria to form in the oil, and it will spoiled oil. So you do want to make sure it's very like crackly, crunchy dry before you put this in an oil. I will tell you that I knew this going into the process, and I just kind of forgot. I was so excited to have some calendula oil in the house, and I put my halfway dried calendula flowers in some oil, and like moments later realized what I was doing. So what I had ended up doing was putting those flowers and oil in a crock pot on low, and I let them infuse for an hour or so, and then I immediately used that oil for sunburns and bug bites and the things that we were experiencing right now. So I tried to use that oil as quickly as possible before any spoilage would happen. So if you're wanting a longer shelf life for that oil, you want to make sure that your flowers and petals are completely dry before you infuse them in the oil. So there are two ways to do that. If you decide to heat up the oil with the flowers in it to speed up that infusion process, you want to make sure you can have it on the lowest possible setting so that you're not killing the live or active constituents in these flowers. So if you get it too hot, you can actually kill off those active constituents, and then those medicinal properties aren't going to be as potent. So as low as possible, or if you can wait for it, you can infuse these in room temperature oil in a dark place in your cupboard or wherever for 4 to 6 weeks. So yes, it does require some waiting, as do most tincture and oil infusions. You got to wait that 4 to 6 weeks to really get that potent infusion. But if you don't have the time to wait, if you need something now, you can cook it on very low or in a crock pot on very low, setting to get those oils infused quicker. So just make sure the flower is dry. So that's an oil infusion. And once you have that oil, you can use it as an oil. You can actually, if you use an edible oil like avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil, grapeseed oil, I'm trying to think of all the different oils, coconut oil, you can actually use calendula oil in your food as a salad dressing or something that you put on top of your food. Just make sure that however you're using that oil is appropriate. You don't want to use extra virgin olive oil with a really hot temperature, because then again, you'll kill off those constituents and cause the oil to go rancid. So that's a whole nother topic of conversation on which oils to use for which cooking purposes. But just be aware that however you use your oil, you want to make sure you're using it in an application that won't destroy the oil or the flowers in the oil. Other than that, jojoba oil is a great oil to use. It is not edible. Sweet almond oil is a great carrier oil to do calendula in. It is edible. It's a very light oil, and you can just rub it right on the skin, on sunburns, on any kind of irritation, pain and inflammation, bug bites, cuts, wounds, scrapes. I have 5 kids. We are constantly dealing with all of those things. And so calendula oil is a great application to have on hand. And diaper rash is another one that you'll see calendula used for, just because it has a very soothing, anti-inflammatory quality about it. So calendula oil can be used in so many different ways. You can take that oil and turn it into a salve, and it's really used the same way. It's just your preference if you want like a runny, liquidy oil, if you want more of if you think about a hard coconut oil, a salve, that type of butter is the other way that you can use calendula. And you would use things like beeswax or shea butter or even coconut oil, those types of oils that will be solid at room temperature to make a calendula salve. But the purposes are still the same in how you use it, whether it's for diaper rash or sunburn or skin irritation or inflammation, cuts and wounds. And really, calendula is the most beneficial when used externally. That is really what calendula is great for. All those things that I just mentioned that you apply externally. It can also be beneficial internally, whether it's used as a tea. You can take it internally through an oil, like I mentioned, or as a tincture. So let's talk about tinctures for a second. Tincture is another kind of infusion that is used either with an alcohol or a glycerin or a half and half. So if you use alcohol, like 80 proof vodka, you can also use rum if you can't handle vodka. It just needs to be 80 proof. You want to do the exact same process that you do with the oil, making sure the flowers and petals are completely dry, immersing it all the way in the alcohol and infusing it in a dark place for 4 to 6 weeks. Once those oils and tinctures are completely infused, you're going to strain the flowers out either through cheesecloth or a really fine sieve into a separate jar, and then you have your tincture or oil, which you should label right away so you don't forget what it is. But tinctures you can use generally in very small doses. If you make a large amount of like a calendula tincture, you can pour it into smaller little dropper bottles that generally you give a dropper full to a child or whoever is needing it, and used as a tincture. Calendula can be good for internal inflammation, but specifically like digestive disorders and digestive trouble is where calendula comes in handy taken internally. Calendula tinctures are also have been said to be really good for fighting off bacteria and viruses. So one thing I like to say about growing your herbal medicine cabinet is you really don't have to have an extensive amount of herbs in your garden to treat most illnesses or issues that you experience in your family. Herbs have such a wide range of applications. You could be growing 2 to 3, 4 different herbs in your garden, and you would be surprised by how many different applications those herbs will have. So just right here with calendula, we've talked about a skin irritation, whether it's dry skin, a bug bite, sunburn, a cut, a bruise, a wound healing, And then internally, digestion, bacteria and viruses. It has a soothing, calming effect. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that calendula does have estrogenic effects, which means it can affect the estrogen levels, helping to balance out or improve those. So if you are pregnant or nursing, I would not recommend that you do calendula because it can adjust your estrogen levels, and that may or may not negatively affect your pregnancy or your lactation. So always talk to your doctor before you start taking an herb, especially if you are dealing with a specific illness or if you're pregnant or nursing. You want to make sure you've run this by your doctor and let them know so that nothing negatively happens. And I did not mention that calendula is part of the Asteraceae family, or the aster family. So if you are allergic to anything in that family, such as daisies, chamomile, sunflowers, amaranth, and calendula, you want to make sure and avoid taking and using this herb if you're allergic to that particular plant family. But other than that, if you are allergic, I don't know, grow it in your garden for beauty and stay 1 foot away. I guess it depends on how allergic you are to this plant. So I don't want to advise growing it if you are, but it is such a beautiful plant to have in the garden. Whether you're using it medicinally or not, just grow it and enjoy its beauty, or pull up those heads regularly and try some calendula tea. Try infusing in oil. It's a really simple process. You just have to wait for those flowers to dry. And look up various recipes for calendula soaps, salves, oils, lip balms for chapped lips. There's so many uses for calendula. I'm really excited to get this herb in our house, dried and used in all these different applications. If you haven't seen it already, I've been doing some videos on different ways to use herbs, whether they're herbs you're growing in your garden or herbs you can forage out on your property. So be sure to check those out here in this playlist. It's a lot of fun to see what you can do with things that might even be considered a weed in your house. So there are so many different uses for those. So if this video has been helpful for you, consider subscribing or sharing it with someone you know it might be helpful for. And as always, my name is Landon Gilfillan here at Pepper and Pine Garden Design, growing gardeners and their gardens, and I'll see you in the next video.